אני פה בשיא החרמון עם שר הביטחון, הרמטכ"ל, אלוף פיקוד צפון, ראש השב"כ ומפקדים בכירים. אנחנו פה בחיתוך מצב כדי להחליט על היערכות ישראל במקום החשוב הזה עד שימצא סידור אחר שמבטיח את ביטחון ישראל. זה מעלה אצלי נוסטלגיה. הייתי פה לפני 53 שנים עם החיילים שלי בסיירת מטכ"ל. המקום לא השתנה, באותו מקום. אבל החשיבות שלו לביטחון ישראל רק קיבלה משנה תוקף בשנים האחרונות, ובמיוחד בשבועות האחרונים, עם האירועים הדרמטיים שמתרחשים כאן מתחתנו בסוריה. אנחנו נקבע את הסידור הטוב ביותר שיבטיח את ביטחוננו.
The Israeli government had decided to double its population in the occupied Golan Heights. Israeli government said that threats from the Syria remained despite the moderate tone of rebel leaders who ousted President Bashar al-Assad. Israel captured most of the strategic plateau from Syria in the 1967 Six-Day War and annexed it in 1981. After Assad fled Syria on December 8, Israeli troops moved into the demilitarized zone inside Syria. That incursion included the Syrian side of the strategic Mount Hermon, which overlooks Damascus, where its forces took over an abandoned Syrian military post. Israel called the incursion a temporary measure to ensure border security. Following is a quick guide to the hilly 1,200 square kilometer or 460 square mile Golan Heights. Golan Heights is a fertile and strategic plateau that overlooks Israel's Galilee region, as well as Lebanon and borders Jordan. Why is the area contentious? In 2019, when President Donald Trump declared US support for Israel's sovereignty over the Golan, Syria demanded Israel's withdrawal. In 2019, then President Donald Trump declared US support for Israeli sovereignty over the Golan. Syria tried to regain the Golan in the 1973 Arab-Israel War but was thwarted. Israel and Syria signed an armistice in 1974, and the Golan has been relatively quiet since. In 2000, Israel and Syria held their highest-level talks over a possible return of the Golan and a peace agreement, but the negotiations collapsed, and subsequent talks also failed. Netanyahu said that he spoke with Trump, who returns to White House on January 20. The Israeli leader said his country has no interest in conflict with Syria. Why does Israel want the Golan? Israel had said earlier that in Syria's more than a decade-long civil war, it was demonstrated that there is a need to keep the plateau as a buffer zone between Israeli towns and the instability of its neighbor. Israel government also voiced concern that Iran, a long-term ally of Assad regime, was trying to cement its presence on Syria's side of the border to launch attacks on Israel. Israel frequently bombed suspected Iranian military assets in Syria in the years before Assad's fall. Syria and Israel have both coveted the Golan's water resources and naturally fertile soil. Who lives on the Golan? Some 31,000 Israelis have settled there, said analyst Avraham Levine of the Alma Research and Education Center, specializing in Israel's security challenges on its northern border. Many work in farming, including vineyards and tourism. The Golan is home to 24,000 Druze, an Arab minority who practice an offshoot of Islam, Levin said. Many of the Druze adherents in Syria were long loyal to Assad regime. Many families have members on both sides of the demarcation line. After annexing the Golan, Israel gave the Druze the option of citizenship, but most rejected it and still identify as Syrian. Who controls the Syrian side of the Golan? Before the outbreak of Syria's civil war in 2011, there was an uneasy standoff between Israeli and Syrian forces. But in 2014, anti-government Islamist rebels overran Quneitra province on the Syrian side. The rebels forced Assad's forces to withdraw and also turned on UN forces in the area, forcing them to pull back from some of their positions. The area remained under rebel control until the summer of 2018, when Assad forces returned to the largely ruined city of Quneitra and surrounding areas following a Russian-backed offensive and a deal that allowed rebels to withdraw. What separates the two sides of Golan? A United Nations Disengagement Observer Force (UNDOF) is stationed in the camps and observation posts along the Golan, supported by the military observers of the United Nations Truce Supervision Organization (UNTSO). Between the Israeli and the Syrian armies is a 400 square kilometer area of separation, often called a demilitarized zone, in which the two countries' armed forces are not permitted under the ceasefire agreement. The Separation of Forces Agreement of May 31, 1974 created an alpha line to the west of the separation area, behind which Israeli military forces must remain, and a Bravo line to the east, behind which Syrian military forces must remain. Extending 25 kilometers beyond the area of separation on both sides is an area of limitation, in which there are restrictions on the number of troops and the number and kinds of weapons that both sides can have there. There is one crossing point between the Israeli and the Syrian side, which until the Syrian civil war began was used mainly by the United Nations forces, a limited number of Druze civilians, and was a transport of agricultural produce. So what has happened since Assad's ouster? Netanyahu's government unanimously approved a more than 40 million shekel or $11 million plan to encourage demographic growth in Golan. It said Netanyahu submitted the plan to the government in the light of the war and the new front facing Syria, and out of a desire to double the population of the Golan. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates condemned Israel's decision with the UAE, which normalized relations with Israel in 2022, describing it as a deliberate effort to expand the occupation. Israel has carried out hundreds of strikes on Syria's strategic weapon stockpiles and military infrastructure, it says, to prevent them from being used by rebel groups that drove Assad from power, some of which grew from movements linked to al-Qaeda and Islamic State. Israel Defense Minister Israel Katz said in a statement on Sunday that the latest development in Syria increased the threat to Israel despite the moderate image that the rebel leaders claimed to present.